President Trump says he plans to impose a 50% tariff on goods made in Brazil starting August 1st.
What if an economic revolution is quietly reshaping Africa's future right now? Imagine a continent breaking free from old financial chains, forging new partnerships that could redefine global trade and power. At the heart of this transformation is China, with bold investments and innovative strategies challenging long-standing systems. But what does this mean for Africa, for the world, and for the future of money itself?
Presidente da República de país do tamanho dos Estados Unidos, sabe, ele precisa saber que o mundo mudou. Sabe? Não queremos imperador.
China has recently unveiled a major new plan for Africa that could significantly reshape the continent's future. At the heart of this plan is China's effort to expand the global use of its currency and establish a new financial system that challenges the long-standing dominance of the US dollar. This is a development that deserves close attention, not only for its impact on Africa, but also for what it means in the broader context of global trade and geopolitics.
India says that the U.S. imports Russian uranium, chemicals, fertilizers, while criticizing their energy imports. Your response to that, sir?
I don't know anything about it. I'd have to check, but we'll get back to you on that. Yeah, please.
The initiative centers around Africa being chosen as the first location for China's global payment system. This system is part of a larger strategy to internationalize China's currency and reduce reliance on the US dollar, which has been the dominant currency in international trade and finance for decades. This move by China is significant because it signals a shift in the global financial order, one that could alter the way countries conduct trade and manage their economies.
Do you still plan to follow through on your threat to impose 100% tariffs on all countries that purchase Russian energy, including China?
Well, I never said a percentage, but we'll be doing quite a bit of that. We'll see what happens over the next fairly short period of time. But we'll see what happens. Yep. You know, they have a meeting tomorrow. We have a meeting with Russia tomorrow. We're going to see what happens. We'll make that determination at that time.
Just last month, China successfully brought together 53 African nations under a new trade framework. This agreement will allow African exports to enter the Chinese market with zero tariffs. In practical terms, this means that goods from these African countries can be sold in China without paying the taxes that usually make exports more expensive. This is an enormous deal for both China and Africa. For China, it strengthens trade ties and expands its influence in a resource-rich continent. For Africa, it opens the door to a massive market for its products, potentially boosting economic growth. What makes this development particularly remarkable is the level of coordination involved. It is rare in modern global politics for a rising power to secure the backing of such a large group of countries in a comprehensive plan that affects trade, currency, and governance. This is not just about economics. It is about reshaping the way global governance and international trade operate. It challenges the existing system, which has historically been dominated by Western powers. The New Deal goes beyond governance and trade policy. It touches on one of the most critical elements of international trade, the role of currency. The dominance of the US dollar has long been a pillar of the global financial system. Almost all international trade, loans, and financial transactions have been conducted in dollars, giving the United States significant influence over the global economy. This dominance also means that countries are vulnerable to US economic sanctions and monetary policies that can affect their economies in profound ways. China's plan to promote the use of its currency in Africa is part of a broader effort to break this dominance. By encouraging African countries to use the Chinese yuan in their trade and financial dealings, China aims to create an alternative system that reduces dependence on the dollar. This is a strategic move with deep geopolitical implications, especially as tensions between the US and China continue to rise. To understand why this is happening now, it is helpful to look at the current geopolitical landscape. There are growing push factors driving countries away from the US dollar, as well as pull factors attracting them towards alternatives like China's financial system. One key push factor has been the unpredictability of U.S. trade policy under recent administrations. The Trump administration, in particular, was known for engaging in trade wars not only with rival countries, but also with traditional allies. This aggressive stance created uncertainty and instability in global trade. Africa, interestingly, was largely absent from the headlines of these trade disputes. But that absence was not because the continent was spared or protected. It was because it was simply not a priority for the U.S. administration. Former President Trump made several public statements that revealed a lack of interest in developing meaningful trade partnerships with African nations. This attitude was reflected in the minimal engagement and limited trade deals offered by the U.S. This neglect left a gap that China has moved quickly to fill. While the U.S. has offered little in terms of meaningful trade agreements, China has actively sought partnerships with African countries, focusing on mutual benefits and long-term development. This difference in approach has not gone unnoticed by African governments, many of which are eager to diversify their economic partners and reduce reliance on Western countries. In fact, 53 of the 54 African nations have now partnered with China in this new trade framework. This near-unanimous cooperation highlights how significant China's role in Africa has become. The continent is not just a source of raw materials for China. It is now a key player in a global financial and trade strategy that has the potential to shift power balances. A recent example of China's engagement is a series of currency and trade agreements signed in Cairo between the central banks of China and Egypt. These agreements are designed to facilitate trade and investment using the Chinese yuan exclusively, bypassing the US dollar altogether. Egypt is not an isolated case. Other African nations, including South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola, have also entered into similar arrangements. Nigeria, for instance, has a currency swap agreement with China valued at around 15 billion yuan. This swap allows the two countries to exchange goods and services directly in their own currencies, eliminating the need to convert to US dollars first. This can save costs, reduce delays, and decrease dependence on foreign financial systems. The currency issue is a major challenge for many African countries. Currently, if a business in Africa wants to sell products to Europe, it cannot do so using its local currency. Instead, the transaction typically involves converting the local currency into US dollars and then into euros. This double conversion adds extra fees, creates delays, and makes African economies dependent on foreign banks. This entire process is controlled by the SWIFT payment network, which is largely dominated by Western countries, particularly the US and Europe. This control gives them considerable power over who can access the global financial system. A stark example of this was seen in 2022, when Western countries froze around $300 billion in Russian foreign currency reserves after the invasion of Ukraine. This move sent a clear message to the global South. If the US and EU can freeze Russia's money, they can do the same to other countries that fall out of favor. For many African nations, this was a wake-up call. It exposed the risks of holding large reserves in US dollars or euros and relying on a system controlled by others. It showed just how much economic power the West holds and how vulnerable countries can be when they play by those rules. China's response has been to offer a real alternative. Its cross-border interbank payment system, known as CIPS, is gaining traction, especially in the global South. CIPS is designed to facilitate international payments using the Chinese yuan, bypassing the US dollar and the SWIFT network. This system is a cornerstone of China's strategy to internationalize its currency and reduce dependence on the dollar. CIPS has rapidly expanded, with many African banks becoming users. In June, South Africa's Standard Bank became the first African bank to enable direct interbank yuan payments with China, completely bypassing the US dollar. This move is part of a broader trend where African countries are adopting new financial tools that allow them to trade more independently. South Africa and Egypt, two of Africa's largest economies, are leading these efforts. Other major economies like Ethiopia, Uganda, Algeria, and Nigeria have also been invited to join BRICS, a bloc that is pushing for a multipolar world with less US dollar dominance. If these countries accept, BRICS could soon include Africa's top 4 economies, marking a significant shift in the continent's financial landscape. What sets China apart from Western countries is its approach to partnerships. Instead of treating African nations solely as resource suppliers, China tailors its engagement to meet the specific development needs of each country. These partnerships aim to be mutually beneficial and long-lasting. China's influence in Africa is not just about trade agreements or investments. It also involves a significant shift in how financial transactions and currency exchanges are handled across the continent. This shift is crucial because it addresses some of the fundamental challenges that have long held back Africa's economic development. One of the key elements of this change is the growing number of currency swap agreements between China and African countries. These agreements allow the two parties to trade directly using their own currencies rather than relying on a third currency, like the US dollar. This seemingly technical detail has far-reaching consequences for trade efficiency, cost savings, and economic sovereignty. A recent example of this trend is the deal signed between the central banks of China and Egypt. In Cairo, these two institutions agreed on a series of arrangements to facilitate trade and investment using only the Chinese yuan. This means that Egypt and China can conduct business directly without the need to convert funds into US dollars first, which simplifies transactions and lowers costs. Egypt is not alone in adopting this approach. South Africa, Nigeria, and Angola have also entered into similar agreements that support yuan-based trade. Nigeria's currency swap agreement with China is particularly noteworthy. Valued at approximately 15 billion yuan, it allows both countries to bypass the US dollar completely when exchanging goods and services. This direct exchange reduces transaction costs and diminishes dependence on the dollar, which is a major benefit for Nigerian businesses and the broader economy. These developments come at a time when the challenges associated with Africa's current reliance on the US dollar are becoming more apparent. Many African nations struggle with currency access problems, especially when it comes to euros or US dollars, which are essential for international trade. For instance, if a business in an African country wants to export goods to Europe, it cannot simply use its own local currency for the transaction. Instead, the business must first convert its local currency into US dollars and then convert those dollars into euros. This two-step currency conversion process is not only cumbersome, but also costly. Businesses must pay fees twice, experience delays in processing payments, and rely heavily on foreign banks and financial institutions. This dependence creates a barrier to trade growth and economic development in Africa, making it harder for local companies to compete in global markets. Underlying this system is the SWIFT payment network, a global messaging system that facilitates international bank transfers. While SWIFT's primary function is to enable secure financial communications, it is largely controlled by Western countries, especially the United States and European nations. This control gives them significant influence over who can participate in global finance and under what conditions. The consequences of this influence were dramatically illustrated in 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In response to the conflict, Western countries, led by the US and the EU, froze roughly $300 billion of Russian foreign currency reserves that were held in banks within their jurisdictions. This unprecedented move sent a powerful message to the rest of the world, including countries in Africa. Access to global finance can be restricted or denied based on geopolitical considerations. For many African nations, the freezing of Russian reserves was a wake-up call. It highlighted the vulnerability of holding large amounts of their own reserves in dollars or euros, currencies controlled by Western powers. The incident showed that economic sanctions could effectively cut a country off from the global financial system, posing significant risks to national economies. This realization has driven African countries to look for alternatives that offer greater financial independence and security. China has stepped in to fill this void with its cross-border interbank payment system, commonly known as CIPS. CIPS is designed to facilitate international transactions using the Chinese yuan, offering an alternative to the US dollar-centric system. Since its launch, CIPS has expanded rapidly, especially among countries in the global south. It now connects thousands of banking institutions across nearly 190 countries and regions. Many African banks have become active users of the system, and this trend is expected to grow as the continent's economies expand. One landmark moment for Africa's adoption of CIPS came in June, when South Africa's Standard Bank became the first African bank to enable direct interbank yuan payments with China. This milestone allowed transactions to bypass the US dollar entirely, making trade between the two countries faster, cheaper, and less dependent on Western financial infrastructure. South Africa's move is particularly significant because it is one of Africa's largest and most developed economies. Along with Egypt, which has also embraced yuan-based trade, these countries are at the forefront of what is being called the dollarization movement in Africa. The aim is to reduce the continent's reliance on the US dollar and establish new financial channels that better serve African interests. The role of BRICS, the group of emerging economies consisting of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is also important in this context. Several African countries, including Ethiopia and Uganda, have been invited to join BRICS or participate as partners. Algeria and Nigeria, which rank as Africa's third and fourth largest economies, have also received invitations. If these countries accept, BRICS could soon represent the continent's four largest economies, strengthening Africa's voice in global financial affairs and promoting alternatives to dollar dominance. China's approach to Africa's financial challenges is distinct from that of many Western countries. Instead of focusing narrowly on resource extraction or short-term gains, China works with individual nations to understand their unique development needs. This approach has led to tailored partnerships that emphasize mutual benefit and long-term growth. By supporting local currency trade agreements and offering access to financial systems like CIPS, China is helping African countries overcome obstacles related to currency convertibility and international payments. This support is vital for accelerating economic growth and increasing Africa's integration into global markets on its own terms. In addition to currency swaps and payment systems, China has also invested heavily in infrastructure projects that support trade and economic development. These include transportation networks, energy projects, and digital connectivity initiatives. Together, these investments create a more robust economic environment where trade can flourish without excessive reliance on Western financial institutions. The broader implications of these changes are significant. As more African countries adopt yuan-based trade and participate in China-led financial networks, the traditional dominance of the US dollar is challenged. This shift could alter global power dynamics and create a more multipolar economic order, where no single currency or country holds overwhelming influence. For African businesses and consumers, the move towards yuan-based trade offers tangible benefits. Reduced transaction costs, faster payment processing, and greater financial autonomy can stimulate commerce and investment. It also reduces the risks associated with sudden economic sanctions or financial restrictions imposed by external powers. That said, the transition is not without challenges. Building trust in a new currency system, ensuring transparency, and managing currency risks require careful planning and cooperation between governments, banks, and businesses. Additionally, the US dollar remains deeply entrenched in global trade, and shifting away from it will take time and sustained effort. Nevertheless, the momentum behind China's financial initiatives in Africa is clear. By offering practical alternatives to dollar dependence, China is not only strengthening its own economic ties with the continent, but also empowering African countries to take greater control over their financial futures. China's involvement in Africa goes far beyond currency swaps and payment systems. One of the most significant aspects of this partnership is China's approach to development and investment, which differs markedly from traditional Western models. This approach is focused on building long-term, mutually beneficial relationships that support African nations' economic diversification and infrastructure growth. A recent and notable example of this strategy is the $350 million investment China made in Angola's agricultural sector. Angola, while known primarily as a major oil and gas producer, faces a significant economic challenge due to its heavy dependence on oil revenues. Oil accounts for around 50% of Angola's GDP, more than 70% of government revenue, and over 90% of its exports. This dependence creates vulnerability, especially amid global shifts away from fossil fuels and volatile oil markets. Recognizing the risks of such concentration, Angola has made diversifying its economy a national priority. Food security has emerged as a critical area for development because the country currently imports nearly half of its food consumption. These imports expose Angola to global price fluctuations, supply chain disruptions, and foreign currency shortages. China's agricultural investment addresses these issues directly. Two major Chinese state-owned enterprises recently signed deals to develop tens of thousands of hectares of farmland in Angola. Among these enterprises is the Chinese conglomerate CITIC, which pledged to invest $250 million over 5 years to develop 100,000 acres dedicated to soybean and corn production. These crops are staples that can significantly boost local food production and reduce reliance on imports. Beyond farming, these companies plan to establish seed research and testing centers aimed at improving agricultural yields. This initiative is designed not only to increase production, but also to attract further investment into Angola's agricultural sector, creating jobs and building local expertise. This investment exemplifies China's broader development philosophy in Africa, which contrasts with that of many Western nations. Historically, Western powers often focused on extracting raw materials with little regard for broader economic development or diversification. In contrast, China's model emphasizes infrastructure building, technology transfer, and supporting sectors that foster sustainable growth. The agricultural deal in Angola is one example of how China is enabling African nations to break free from the resource exporter model and build more balanced, resilient economies. This shift is critical for Africa's long-term development, especially as the global economy transitions toward greener energy sources and new industrial demands. While China is expanding its footprint in sectors like agriculture and infrastructure, the United States has been retreating from Africa in recent years. Under policies that prioritize America first, the U.S. has imposed tariffs, reduced foreign aid, and closed diplomatic missions across the continent. These actions have left a gap that China has been quick to fill with increased investment, trade agreements, and diplomatic engagement. This divergence in approach has affected the perception of both countries across Africa. China is generally viewed as a consistent and reliable partner, offering practical support tailored to each country's needs. The U.S., meanwhile, has struggled with a negative image shaped by trade barriers, aid cuts, and controversial foreign policy positions, including support for Israel in the Gaza conflict, which has sparked widespread outrage. China's presence is therefore seen not just in economic terms, but as a form of partnership that offers African nations a genuine seat at the global table. Through initiatives such as the yuan-based trade agreements, infrastructure projects, and development finance, China is creating opportunities for African countries to participate more fully and on their own terms in the global economy. One of the reasons for this positive reception is China's emphasis on respect for national sovereignty and non-interference in domestic affairs. This principle has resonated with many African leaders who value partnerships that do not come with political conditions or demands. Furthermore, China's infrastructure projects address critical bottlenecks in African economies. Reliable roads, railways, ports, and power supply are essential for expanding trade and industrialization. By financing and building these projects, China helps lay the foundation for broader economic growth. These infrastructure investments also create jobs and develop skills within African countries, contributing to human capital development. This combination of physical and human infrastructure strengthens the continent's ability to attract further investment and engage in global value chains. Looking ahead, China's role in Africa is likely to deepen as the continent's economies grow and its global importance rises. Africa's large and youthful population represents a vast market and workforce. Combined with China's willingness to invest and innovate, This creates significant potential for mutually beneficial growth. However, it is important to recognize that challenges remain. African countries must manage debt risks associated with large-scale investments, ensure transparency and good governance, and develop policies that maximize the benefits of foreign partnerships. Equally, China faces criticism for some of its projects related to environmental impacts, labor practices, and local community engagement. Addressing these challenges requires ongoing dialogue and cooperation between China, African governments, and other stakeholders. Transparent agreements, local capacity building, and sustainable development practices will be key to ensuring that investments deliver long-term value for African nations. Another area where China's impact is visible is in the evolving geopolitical landscape of global trade and finance. By offering alternatives to Western-led institutions and financial systems, China is helping African countries diversify their international partnerships. This diversification reduces the risks associated with over-reliance on a single partner or currency, which has been a historical concern. Moreover, China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, which aims to enhance global connectivity through infrastructure and trade linkages, includes numerous African countries. The BRI brings investment into transport networks, energy projects, and digital infrastructure that underpin economic development. Through these channels, Africa is increasingly integrated into new global supply chains that connect the continent not only with China, but with other emerging markets. This expanded connectivity has the potential to transform Africa's economic landscape, making it a more active participant in global trade rather than merely a supplier of raw materials. The growing number of African countries invited to join or partner with BRICS also reflects the shifting balance of global power. Inclusion in this bloc provides African economies with greater leverage and influence in international forums, potentially reshaping trade rules and financial governance to better reflect their interests. China's expanding role in Africa is characterized by substantial investments aimed at economic diversification, infrastructure development, and financial innovation. These efforts are designed to address some of the most pressing challenges facing the continent, from currency dependence to food security and economic resilience. While challenges exist on both sides, the partnership between China and Africa represents a significant shift in global economic relations. It offers African nations new opportunities to pursue growth strategies tailored to their unique needs and ambitions. As this relationship evolves, it will be important for African countries to balance the benefits of Chinese investment with the need for sustainable development, sound governance, and diversified partnerships. When managed effectively, the China-Africa partnership has the potential to be a catalyst for profound economic transformation across the continent.